Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. We're really excited for this event, though the word excited may come with some trepidation, because we are here under unique and pressing circumstances, to be sure. But we have no doubt that the discussions tonight will, if not give us some steps forward to sort of start planning what we can do, they will at least give us very critical and crucial perspective on how we should move forward in the world. So I'll keep this short. I just wanted to introduce myself in the event a little bit. My name is Nick. I use he, him pronouns. I organize with the Sunrise Movement with a lot of my time, and also with Mass Peace Action as well. So I've spent a lot of time on climate stuff in Sunrise and the Peace and Climate Group in MAPA. And you know, I suppose you all don't need me to tell you the circumstances that we're under, but you know, we are all here to you know, come together in unity in a pretty scary situation. You know, while we're talking about the election and, you know, what many say is the most important election of our lifetimes, which includes for some very expansive lifetimes and for others shorter, that really underscores the importance of this event when we come together, you know, not just as you know, people within our circles and communities, but people from a lot of different communities and from a lot of different circles. It really shows how we really have to move as a unit going forward. And I think, you know, if we take anything away from tonight, it's the fact that, you know, even as I'm speaking, you know, we're already at 100 people here. This is something that is on so many minds, in so many hearts, and the one crucial goal that we're all working towards is getting everybody on the same page so we can act towards justice in a future that we can all have a part in. So without further ado, I am going to first thank our sponsors. We're so happy to be able to put this on tonight. We had some help and support from, of course, Mass Peace Action, 350 Mass, the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security, the Mass Alliance of HUD Tenants, and Progressive Massachusetts. So thank you so much to those organizations for helping us out tonight, and your work is so invaluable. We're lucky to have it in the world. Great, so I will pass it over to our first speaker, who is Joseph Gerson. Oh, and my thing disappeared. Oh no, oh, there it is. Okay, so there we go. So Joseph is president of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security, a member of Mass Peace Action's board, and vice president of the International Peace Bureau. He also serves as a co-convener of Mass Peace Action's Authoritarianism Working Group. As a civil rights movement organizer and Vietnam War era draft resistor and organizer, he later joined the War Resisters International in Europe, working with World War I conscientious objectors, nonviolent resistors to Nazi rule, PLO representatives, and Israeli pacifists. He helped to launch the nuclear weapons freeze movement, worked closely with A-bomb survivors, Asia Pacific and European nuclear disarmament, and peace movement leaders. His books include The Deadly Connection, Nuclear War and US Military Intervention, The Sun Never Sets, and Empire and the Bomb. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Joseph.
How to unmute you, Joseph?
Yeah, I unmuted. Now I'm muted again. Hold on.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, thank you, Nick, and thank you for that very generous introduction. Several months ago, before the Trumpian assault on our electoral process, became as blatant as it is now, it was already clear that Trump and his minions were moving to impose what Europeans would call an illiberal democracy, or worse. With mass peace action, we created this authoritarian working group. Probably better should be called the counter-authoritarian working group. Drawing from recent articles by Van Goss and Max Elbaum, Walden Bellows' chapters on the rise of Italian fascism and the counter-revolution going on now in the global north, and Fritsch's new book on Hitler's rise, we sought to more deeply understand what history could tell us about the potential dangers of this moment and the forces at work in our society. We also held 2 webinars, and as I begin, I want to stress some of the major points made in those sessions. Noam Chomsky stressed that we face a unique confluence of crises: the pandemic, being closer to nuclear annihilation than ever before, and the climate crisis that could end life as we know it in this century. There's also the continuing terror of white supremacist racism and the assault on the democratic foundations of our government. To this, I would add that we now have an egomaniac whose mind is still more addled on steroids, who is driving us toward possible catastrophe. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, formerly Secretary of Defense Colin Powell's Chief of Staff, who participated in the now well-known tabletop election game, illuminated these dangers. He warned that, quote, the incumbent owns all the instruments of power, unquote, and has sycophants in charge of most of those instruments, with the possible exception of the military. The strategic deployments of federal law enforcement, like Homeland Security contractors to Democratic stronghold cities, he said, reflects a strategic testing of all of us. The historian Van Goss reminded us that the U.S. has never lived up to its declared visions, but with democratic, that is small d, advances since the 1960s, we do have something to protect. He then chillingly ran through what we would face with a creeping Trumpian coup aimed at imposing an illiberal democracy. The facade of democracy would be maintained, as it is in Russia, Hungary, and Poland. There would be purges of government institutions, some, as you know, are already underway, with inspector generals ousted, intelligence and other agencies no longer accountable to Congress. A second Trump administration, based on appeals to racism, xenophobia, and ethno-nationalism, would pulverize the government, creating a lawless regime with loyalists in all government positions, green lights for police and militia violence, and all of this tolerated by the packed right-wing courts. Mike Crenshaw from Portland and Ty DePass in South Carolina reminded us that police violence and the exploitation and discarding of Black and other people of color workers is an extension of the 400-year-old integration of racism and capitalism, and an extension of the plantation system. Mike noted that Portland and Minneapolis are overwhelmingly white cities, 2 of the whitest in the country. Thus, we need to understand the brutality of the police repression in those cities was directed largely against white protesters in order to scare whites away from solidarity with Black Lives Matter and other oppressed people. Speaking personally, let me say that as I've engaged with people who've endured personality cults in Germany, the Soviet Union, and China, and as I read Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here, I couldn't precisely envision how a personality cult would play out here. Now we know. The central question in November's election is the choice between preserving a semblance of constitutional democracy or imposition of a minority, repressive, white supremacist authoritarianism. Trump has called for his often armed true believers to watch the polls. That was his dog whistle to intimidate voters. His enablers have urged violence and called for a declaration of martial law if he loses the election. And Trump vowed to quickly repress post-election protests. In the face of these fascist threats, I've taken strength from the courageous history of African-American resistance, nonviolent resistors to Nazi occupations and Japanese militarism, and those who resisted Marcos's dictatorship, who I've been privileged to know and work with. We also have the hundreds of thousands of people who've taken to the streets over the past month in Belarus. They insist that the results of their landslide election over Alexander Lukashenko described as the last European dictator, be respected. Friends, Donald Trump aspires to be a tyrant, an absolute ruler unrestrained by law or constitution. His former fixer, Michael Cohen, wrote that Trump aspires to reproduce Vladimir Putin's transformation of Russia into his personal fiefdom, to which I would add that a Trump election defeat could lead him to doing serious jail time. That helps to explain his desperation. Trump's case, what's what I've got here? Yeah, so Trump is ruling much the same way that he lied, cheated, destroyed, and enriched himself with the Trump organization. His wealth and power were accumulated by bullying, cheating, and crushing contractors, business partners, and banks. He even cheats at golf. Now he lies, appoints sycophants to run government institutions, threatens and assaults science, and refuses to accept any personal responsibility. More than 205,000 people have been lost to COVID. Our economy is devastated. The climate crisis accelerates. Immigrants remain confined in cages. And the campaign to reverse the civil rights movement achievements is well underway. And from Mar-a-Lago to the billeting of military and Secret Service agents on his golf courses, Trump has been increasing his wealth at taxpayers' expense. Trump and his enablers are doing their best to transform this country into a banana republic. Witness his escape from Walter Reed Hospital. He's appealed to Russian and Chinese leaders to intervene in November's election, and he launched an unprecedented voter suppression campaign, including his attack on the post office. His efforts to delegitimize the election are designed to pave the way for a post-election coup d'etat, and to give his new fixer, Attorney General Barr, the political landscape that he needs. Trump and McConnell have not only packed the courts with right-wing judges, but they are hypocritically working to ram through Amy Barrett's Supreme Court appointment. Trump, you'll remember, said that he wants Barrett on the court in time to rule on ballots, which is to say, to provide her critical vote to overturn the election results. If we are to turn this country around, we need to acknowledge that Trump is as much a symptom as a cause of the crisis we face. He is a product of forces accumulated over generations. One way to mark the beginning is with the publication of The Lost Cause in 1866, followed by Jim Crow apartheid and the Nixon-Reagan Southern Strategy. The latter has parallels to the rise of 20th century European fascism, when plutocratic wealth reinforced its power by allying with violent and racist forces, only to be consumed by them. We've had the creation of right-wing think tanks, Citizens United, the creation of Goebbels-like propaganda agencies, including Fox TV and Breitbart and others. And now we have the US version of Mussolini's and Hitler's brown shirts. We also need to acknowledge that the Democratic Party did its part. The Great Recession resulted from the Democratic Leadership Council and Bill Clinton abandoning the party's traditional working class base to embrace the management class. Repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act opened the way for banks to gamble with casino capitalism. The resulting bubble burst, with 10 million Americans losing their homes and countless other deprivations. Obama saved the neoliberal economy, but failed to reverse the growing insecurity fueled by economic globalization and technological transformation. These in turn created the fertile ground for the rise of a faux right-wing populism, not unlike Europe in the 1930s. Dangerous times are not new in US history. I remember my parents telling me about their fears when Father Coughlin made his broadcasts in the 1930s, encouraging the rise of racist and anti-Semitic fascists here in the United States. With courageous actions, and large and small, those times were overcome. Jim Crow was buried by voter registration drives in the face of KK violence, by nonviolent marches in the face of Bull Connor's dogs and clubs, by challenges in the courts, and ultimately in Congress. Women won the right to vote. Burning draft cards and mass demonstrations contributed to the ending of the Indochina War. And with the Freeze movement, we helped to make the Cold War history. It's true that Biden is a flawed candidate, but a Biden victory will buy us time to organize for real security, political, health, economic, racial, social, climate, and peace that we desperately need. Friends, if we are to preserve something akin to democracy, and press for future generations' rights. We must end Trump's tyranny. A Biden landslide would seriously undermine Trump's ability to pull off a coup. And winning a Democratic majority in the Senate needed to pass essential legislation is within sight. Friends, thank you for listening, and I look forward to the talks of this evening's other panelists as they outline how elections can be won and how we can protect the results.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I don't think anyone could have done a better job than you just did laying everything out. Thank you so much for your words and encouragement. I will say, just to sort of inject myself for a hot second, as we are hearing each of the speakers, think of some questions, because we're going to have a Q&A session later in this program. So think of them. We'll put them in the chat later, so don't put them in the chat yet. So, we want folks to not be super flooded yet, but, keep them in your heads, write them down or something. Great. Okay, one more thank you for Joseph. That was very, very eloquent. So we're going to move on to our next speaker. We're so happy to have Christina Vincent joining us, Assistant Director of Common Cause, Massachusetts. Christina joined Common Cause in April 2019. Oh, here's my cat, everybody. Okay, maybe Christina's cat will come too. Christina joined Common Cause, Massachusetts in April 2019 as the Assistant Director. She helps manage campaigns to strengthen democracy in the Commonwealth. Prior to joining Common Cause Mass, Christina helped researchers translate their work into accessible and useful policy briefs for policymakers and civic leaders in her role as a Senior Research and Policy Fellow at the Scholars Strategy Network. Additionally, she also worked on projects around civic engagement, academic freedom, and criminal legal reform. She has a BA in Peace and Justice Studies from Tufts University, where I study too, pretty cool, where she concentrated in Israel, Palestine, and US policy. So we're very excited to hear from Christina. Please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick, for that introduction. And it's really nice to be here. In the Peace and Justice Studies program at Tufts, Mass Peace Action was lifted up a whole lot as a really great organization to get involved in. And I also want to thank Joseph for, for your remarks. I don't think I need to reiterate how high stakes of a moment we're all in. And I think I want to start by saying that where Common Cause, which is a good government watchdog and democracy reform organization, has been leading from here in Massachusetts, I think it's fair to say is a place of understanding that despite all of the immense uncertainty and high stakes around our elections and the crisis that our country is in nationally, we have to do everything that we can to address those problems that we know still skew our democracy here, and do everything we can in our home state to keep our elections safe and participatory. So to that end, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Safe Elections Network, which is a project that I've worked on quite a bit with our Beth Huang, who's going to speak a little bit later. Some of the changes that we worked on for our fall elections here, and then the work that really has followed since that legislation signing. So last spring, as COVID was breaking out, we heard from a ton of organizations who normally aren't necessarily involved in election reform, who understood just how clear a threat COVID posed to the safety and issues of accessibility in our elections. So the Safe Elections Network was really born out of that shared concern. It's a group of 130 organizations who came together to fight for legislation. We, over the course of the summer, were able to get every single policy provision that we asked for, with truly only one exception. The original legislation that we fought for included automatic vote by mail, so automatically mailing ballots rather than applications to voters. Instead, we have a system where ballot applications are sent out to voters, which is still a very strong second. Just to touch quickly on some of the changes that are included in the legislation we fought for, and also that gets to how the voting process is different this year in Massachusetts. One is we have this expanded system of vote by mail, where ballots are mailed out after folks request a mail ballot, either through the paper form or now they can online. We have expanded early voting. This year we have 2 weeks of expanded early voting, which I would also add that one of our challenges has been so much unpredictability. When we started pushing for this legislation, I think that we all saw vote by mail as, nobody's deluded into thinking that there's such thing as a one-stop shop for having participatory elections during a pandemic, but we saw vote by mail as critically important. It remains important, but given the attacks on the USPS and uncertainty around delays in the mail, the expanded early voting window is really, really significant. This year, because it also shortened the legislation we fought for, got a reduced registration deadline. We technically have 1 week of a period of de facto same-day registration, which is a reform that we have been pushing for a very long time. And there are a number of other changes in the legislation that really help elections administration, which I know sometimes doesn't sound like the most exciting thing. But for example, allowing elections officials to begin processing mail ballots during the early voting period reduces the risk that we will see what we saw in other states and in some instances in Massachusetts in municipal elections in the spring, where either trays and trays, or in the case of Wisconsin, hundreds of thousands of ballots were left uncounted. Another thing we have this fall that I think is really important to stress to our honestly just like friends and networks right now is that elections officials have until 5 p.m. on the Friday after Election Day to process ballots. That just means that we need to be prepared to not have results at whether 11 p.m. on Election Day or the following morning. We're going to have to wait for election results, even in Massachusetts. And it's important to know, especially in this moment where there's so much uncertainty, what is a good and intentional thing and what's not. So in July, Governor Baker signed an act relative to voting options into law. And I would love to say that we were all able to, sit back and enjoy having finished our work, but obviously there's a lot more that needed to come after that. I know Beth is going to talk about all of the voter education work that is really a critical piece to having safe elections and participatory and especially equitable elections during a pandemic. But I'll just say that it's important always, but especially this year, because all of these changes are only as good as voters know about them. And I think we've also seen, even after the primaries, that vote by mail was more accessible to our whiter affluent communities in Massachusetts. We saw higher rejection rates of mail ballots in our lower income communities and communities of color. I think Arlington had, for example, less than 1% of rejected mail ballots. Brockton had I think it was about 5%. And it's really that makes this year voter education so important. Every year, Common Cause, Lawyers for Civil Rights, and other organizations work on election protection. And I'll also add that I'm pointing at a couple of ways where we do really need people to be getting involved right now to protect our elections and build political power here in our home state. One of them is text banking and phone banking for voter education, and the other is getting involved in election protection. There are really two main parts to that. One, in election protection, we train and organize volunteers to serve. This year, people will be roving poll monitors or socially distanced poll monitors to help voters who have any number of problems at Election Day. Roving poll monitors will look out for long lines, provide information on the 866 Our Vote hotline, which is another piece of election protection. We train folks to man that hotline help voters resolve problems. It's a tiered system, so if one person on the hotline can't answer a question, it goes up to a trained lawyer, and from there, an elections expert. The other piece of of election protection this year is social media monitoring. I don't think it would be a surprise to anyone to say that a real threat to our elections this year is not just misinformation online, people accidentally providing the wrong information, wrong deadlines, but also intentional misinformation or disinformation, which we've seen from President Trump, especially around vote-by-mail ballots. So social media monitors go through a training on how to respond and how to look for those kinds of instances. I think we've already seen something like 40,000 instances of disinformation get resolved. People get directed to either the 866 Our Vote hotline or correct information. And so that's I think it's an excellent way to get involved from our state in Massachusetts to help in Massachusetts or get involved in other states. I'll put a link in the chat with a page that takes you to all of these things. And then there are really two other pieces of election. I do see these as election protection initiatives in Massachusetts that I should say, not every single Safe Elections Network organization is involved in every one of these. It's a little bit splintered. But one, we developed a training and recruitment program called the Massachusetts Student Poll Worker Corps, where we worked with election officials to design a training that would be useful for them. The challenge around poll workers this year was not just recruitment, but training and also vetting all of these new applicants. The one tiny piece of good news that I have to offer is that in Massachusetts, we are generally in a good place on poll workers. We've had elections officials with very few exceptions, ask us to hold off on sending them any new people. So another thing this program is doing is we have a cohort of folks who are trained and ready to go should shortages arise starting about 2 weeks before Election Day. And then the last thing that I want to touch on, a group within the Safe Elections Network and a coalition of organizations across the state have been working on a problem that is absolutely not new, but exacerbated this year because of COVID, which is ballot access for folks who are incarcerated in our state and who are unable to participate and basically face a system of de facto disenfranchisement. These folks are disproportionately people of color, low income, and I have one small piece of good news, which is I think for the first time in Massachusetts, just a few minutes ago, the Secretary of Commonwealth issued guidance to election officials affirming the right of folks who still maintain the right on paper, who are incarcerated, to cast a ballot, and providing guidance for how these folks should vote and what election officials should expect and do. The problem really is threefold there. One, election officials didn't know, so people who were incarcerated and tried to vote regularly have their absentee ballots requested. The second piece is there's nothing that holds on the county level sheriffs to providing any meaningful ballot access. In Massachusetts, the burden basically is on incarcerated citizens to figure it out on their own, figure out how to get an absentee ballot, which I don't think I think that we have seen in year after, I know that year after year, we've seen that just doesn't work. And then last, statewide, there's no system in place, whether it's holding sheriffs to providing ballot access or kind of streamlining this process. So this little victory tonight it sounds kind of maybe less than exciting, but I think it's a really big step. And takes us closer to a system where folks who maintain the right to vote on paper can actually exercise it in practice. The last thing I'll also say on that is generally in past elections, the way incarcerated citizens have been able to cast a ballot is if truly an army of volunteers go to a jail and provide absentee ballots, walk folks through the process, one great example, there's an excellent program in Essex County that a local league has run for the past couple elections. They were all set to go this year. And there was an outbreak of COVID in Essex County, which is terrible on a number of fronts. But it means that basically this ballot access program is getting shut down. And to me, that only exacerbates how undemocratic it is, to say the least, that we have a system where eligible voters require volunteers to come into a state facility in order for them to be able to exercise their fundamental right to vote. So in recap, you know, there are so many urgent issues just on the national front. I know it's easy to get understandably overwhelmed with all of the uncertainty that we're facing. I think that our call again is to of course do what we can to ensure that we have a safe transition of power in the long run, but in the meantime, there are real issues in our own state that disproportionately strip political power from our communities of color and low-income communities, that make our democracy less than fully functional and fully accessible. And a lot of the work that we're doing in the Safe Elections Network and at Common Cause is aimed at you know, ensuring that the wheel of democracy here keeps on turning and we only continue to expand access to the ballot and protect our democracy here in Massachusetts. And that's all I've got.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christina. That was so informative, and I love the way you framed it. I think we got, you know, not to jump the Q&A, but we had some rumblings in the chat about, you know, oh, we live in Massachusetts, like we're a very blue state, you know, are we good? It just seems like there's so much we can do, which is, for me, just a huge takeaway from what you said. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A too.
Perfect. So get your questions ready for Christina. She's going to be ready for all of your inquiries. All right, so we're going to keep on rolling. We're going to move on to our next speaker. So we're going to pass it over to Beth Wong. Beth is the executive director at the Massachusetts Voter Table and works with over 25 community organizations to increase voter turnout and civic leadership in communities of color and working class people in Massachusetts. As the director of the Massachusetts Voter Table, Beth serves on the steering committees of Raise Up Mass and the Election Modernization Coalition, and convenes Mass Counts, a coalition that works with nonprofits to achieve a complete count in the 2020 census. Very, very important. Prior to joining Massachusetts Voter Table, as the field coordinator in 2016, Beth worked at Jobs with Justice as the national coordinator of the Student Labor Action Project. Beth is a senior trainer with the Midwest Academy as well. Beth has a lot of positions. Beth also serves on the boards of directors of boards of directors of State Voices, Better Future Project, whom we love, the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, and the Planned Parenthood Advocacy Fund of Massachusetts. A lot of boards. She hails from Wisconsin, where she became politicized through fights for workers' rights and racial justice, and holds a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So, without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Beth. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, it's so great to be here, and it's good to see some familiar faces. Thanks so much to Michael Kane from Mass Alliance of HUD Tenants, which is one of the organizations that I think was a founding member of the Massachusetts Voter Table, who invited me here. It's great to see John Ratliff from Mass Senior Action Council and some comrades from 350 and Better Future Project. So I guess I might start, before I launch into talking about voter education, I think the first thing that I just want to share is my personal story about why I'm a passionate fighter for democracy. So as Nick read from my now embarrassing long bio that I have that I passed along. I hail from Wisconsin and was part of a student organization, part of many student organizations at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, particularly the Student Labor Action Coalition, and we fought alongside members of AFSCME, Local 171, the Campus Workers Union at UW-Madison, on stopping the privatization of one cafeteria of a research center on campus in fall 2010. And then, of course, Scott Walker won election in November 2010. And in the first 6 months of when he became governor in Wisconsin, he gutted the public sector labor unions. He put in voter ID. He cut the University of Wisconsin system's budget by $300 million and cut K-12 by almost $800 million, all while passing tax cuts for the rich and the biggest corporations. And that's when I fully understood that we were no longer living in a democracy. I think it is vitally important that all of us have the right to vote, that we have the right to organize in our workplaces, that we have the right to breathe clean air, to drink clean water, and to live free of many forms of oppression. And so that's how I became a deep believer in democracy, and by that I mean not just what happens on election day, and not just what happens at the ballot box or in the polling locations, but people's ability to have a real say in the decisions that impact their lives. And that's what this election this November is all about, is the ability for people to have an actual say in who is the leader of this country, who is their representative in the state house, and more. So that's what's at stake. That is what's at stake in Massachusetts. That's what's at stake in my home state of Wisconsin. That's what's at stake all across this country at every polling location, every neighborhood, every community, and more. So that's why I'm here tonight. That's why I'm committed to the ups and downs of this democratic process, no matter where it takes us. So I wanted to share a little bit about what we're doing to get out the vote during this pandemic in Massachusetts and why it matters. This is, of course, a presidential election. I anticipate that over 70% of registered voters in Massachusetts are going to turn out. Often, voters, first-time voters, unlikely voters will actually turn out during presidential elections, and that's why 2020 is so important, even in Massachusetts, where it seems like Joe Biden is polling at 35 percentage points ahead of Trump. To win things in 2021 through 2024, we need to get out the vote in 2020. This is the time to grow the electorate as big as possible, to make anything that we work on more democratic and more possible in the next 4 years. So some brief things to share before I hop in to how we're getting out the vote. Right now, people of color make up about 1 in 5 eligible voters. So those are people who are over 18, who are citizens, and are not incarcerated on a felony conviction right now. However, people of color only made up 1 in 10 ballots cast in 2018. So even though people of color make up 1 in 5 eligible voters, we're only casting 1 in 10 ballots. That means that we're leaving just under 50% of our power on the table. It's a little bit less bad in places in Suffolk County and Boston in particular because of the hard work that many organizers have put in over the course of many decades. I really think of the work that many people put in on Mel King's election in the early 1980s that got us to this point where voters of color are wasting half as few votes in Suffolk County as we are in the rest of the state. We have a lot of work to do in every other county, including Suffolk County in the state. I think of Plymouth County, where Brockton, the city with the highest proportion of Black residences, in this little corner of Plymouth in the county that voted most for Trump in 2016, we need to get out the vote for everyone in Brockton. We need to make sure that the elections work for everyone in Brockton. We cannot keep leaving power on the table. In September, almost 18,000 mail-in ballots were rejected, and these often happened in places in municipalities with more people of color and more low-income people. Voting by mail shouldn't only work for people who have a mailbox in front of a driveway of their single-family home. It should work for everyone across Massachusetts. I'm going to slide by that. So what we've done with many partner organizations is we are texting and calling many voters across the state. For the primary election, we made 233,000 calls. We had almost 12,000 conversations, and we sent out 57,000 text messages. We worked with at least 356 organizers, leaders, and volunteers across the state. Really importantly, 76% of those conversations were with voters of color. And about a third of the voters are Black voters, about a quarter are Latinx voters, and about a sixth of the voters are Asian American Pacific Islander voters, so are mostly Black and immigrant or second generation voters. We host phone banks every Tuesday from 11 to 1, every Wednesday and Thursday from 5 to 7, and we now host text banks, especially with Common Cause, on Wednesdays from 4 to 5. And so we start every training, or we start every phone bank with a brief training, and would love to work with any of you on this call. And so really the last thing that I'll end with is truly, even though we have voter in our name, we really believe that democracy goes beyond election day. It goes beyond voters. It's the ability of people having a say on the decisions that impact their everyday lives. So we hope to see you on the doors when it's safe, in the streets with a mask, and all around the social movement in Massachusetts. This is our year to make an impact and lay the foundation for future victories in the next 4 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Beth. And I love your slides. Whoever designed those is a true hero. They were very, very beautiful. Did you design them, Beth?
I did not. We work with an amazing women-owned cooperative that does communications called the Samara Collective. Highly recommend them to anyone.
Wow, I'm definitely writing that down. Okay, that was a clutch recommendation. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we're gonna keep rolling on this theme, and if you'll notice, we sort of like planned out a little arc for you all. So we're gonna roll into our next speaker, who is I hope I'm doing it right. It'll be Kathy Hoffman, though I'm not sure she wants me to call her Catherine.
No, Kathy's good.
Okay, Kathy's good. Okay, so Kathy, for 20 years, has directed the Cambridge Peace Commission. It's a department of the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, working to make connections between local concerns of social justice with global peacemaking efforts through city resolutions, community organizing, sister city relationships, anti-violence work, and peace education. As a part of as a Peaceable Schools educator, Peace and Justice Corps youth leadership developer, Cambridge Bethlehem People to People project founder, nonviolent peace force trainer, Kathy supports social and community movements which embody in the present the kind of changes that they're trying to make for the future. She is a neighborhood activist, social change worker, and restorative justice circle keeper. Yes, someone just said Kathy is everything. Yes, this bio is getting me pumped up. She has been a trainer of nonviolence and nonviolent direct action since her first training in 1982 at the UN Actions on Disarmament. Believing in the power of nonviolence to grow our souls and embody our common and uncommon humanity, Kathy has led workshops for youth, unions, anti-intervention solidarity workers, community and faith groups, and It occupied people on issues of civil disobedience, nonviolence, and direct action. And for the last 5 years, she has been an ongoing NVDA, nonviolent direct action trainer, trainer of trainers and arrestees for movements ranging from the 1.5-year fight to stop the West Roxbury pipeline and the Poor People's Campaign to the Extinction Rebellion work to draw attention to the climate emergency. We're so happy to have Kathy here. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and make the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive in this great turning. We shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love.
And it goes on like that. That's Ma Muse, the song We Shall Be Known, just letting us, reminding us through song what a time this is to be alive in this great turning. It is a real joy and a pleasure to see all you rectangles and to be in this extraordinary experiment of activism in the midst of so many global pandemics that we are dealing with. I have written something out. It will be in the chat or you'll get it. It references also some resources that I use. Those will also be available to you. So I can just say a few things. The phrase, do as I say, not as I do, is traditionally a cautionary statement or reflection of hypocrisy. For me in this moment, I am trying to put together some words of possible direction, some of which I have actually followed and some of which are only aspirational. The truth is I feel quite at sea in this unprecedented moment with an even more decidedly, possibly unprecedented future. I think some of the tools which best suit us are the ones that I'm least seasoned in, like creativity, trusting emergent ideas, collaboration, large-scale vision, multifaceted approaches of body and spirit. So I'm just going to try and share a few thoughts. Some tested, some conjecture about direct action in this time. I want to just echo Joseph about defending our democracy. I don't actually believe we have democracy, which would really mean a government, institutions, policies, and rules which honor and care for each and all voices. There's a really pithy quote from Fannie Lou Hamer, whose birthday it is today, who says, "With the people, for the people, by the people, I crack up when I hear it. I say with the handful, for the handful, by the handful, because that's what's really happening." So when I say defending democracy, it is in tribute to the African-American struggles and those of other remarkably marginalized groups who have believed and worked for a concept of democracy, and again, an aspirational notion. So I'm just going to say a few thoughts about direct action as a complement to what we've been hearing so beautifully from Beth and Christina. Why direct action as a component? I wrote 2 sentences. They have the power of force, violence, institutions, the military, and the state. We have the power of the people. And when the power of the people is joined, anything and everything is possible. I wrote out something that I just learned from Barbara Peterson, kind of nine steps around involved with direct action. You can read it. So I'm just going to highlight a few from in my own words. The first, in terms of components of the how of direct action, one I write is about embodying messages. Messages which convey our vision, which affirm our identities, which build community, which challenge the opposition, which invite participation. We are taking action not just for the moment, but to build a movement. And so those components of affirmation of who we are, it's really important to counter the messages that have been so denying the humanity of so many of us in so many ways. Means being creative in our messaging, in our actions, not just strikes, but slowdowns, not just confrontational demonstrations, but redefining scenarios. Maybe you've heard about the gay men who have taken on the Proud Boys hashtag, and they're posting pictures of themselves dancing, kissing, marching, cooking, etc. Choosing images, clothing, etc. to connect, doing protective accompaniment as well as independent actions. Talking about non-cooperation, withdrawing our cooperation from the institutions as well as being proactive. Someone said in one of the seminars that I've been to, when in doubt, in the midst of chaos, sit down, sing, unless something else has been decided. And one of the references is about, right, thank Erica Chenoweth, right. So, I mean, someone else could be doing this too. Thank you, Erica. One of the references is just Gene Sharp's 198 methods. Part of it is really just getting creative. There's also a little video for some people called from someone in Oregon, which links to choosingdemocracy.us. There's a lot of different folks just trying to figure out how to respond, which is thrilling. So embodying messages, building who we are. The second, nonviolence and discipline, which I see as a kind of set of guidelines which define the action, enable everyone to call on those principles when things break down. Because without those guidelines, anything goes, from outside, but also from inside, meaning different politics that can divide us, or provocateurs who are absolutely put into our movements to destroy and put us down. Fighting fire with fire burns the house down. Fighting hate with hate melts us. I guess for me, the US is arguably the most violent country in the world, born out of genocide and built on slavery. So those foundations, that orientation around violence is so deep as part of our conditioning. And for me, part of nonviolence as a philosophy as well as a strategy is to try and begin to practice something different than that, ways in which we have been divided from each other. Something about community agreements, we can talk more about that. But the notion of creating in our movements, in our meetings, some set of shared agreements so that we can move forward together. Second thing, training and preparation. Again, there's two resources I'm giving you that I put together, one about planning actions, the other about logistics. And the third is about, so the logistics is NVDA support, resource sheets, how to prepare ourselves. Things are really getting a little bit testy out there. I've had my first experience. I mean, I've been involved with a lot of CD, a lot of demonstrations for many, many decades and many, many issues. And I actually had my first experience 2 weeks ago with the alt-right, with Turtle Boy and others coming. And the way in which they present themselves is a whole new set of challenges for us to respond to. And I think, as Joseph said so eloquently, you know, we may want to narrow it around Trump, but Trump has actually been the greatest gift to us of revealing the depth of the divisions and the depths of white supremacy that we live with. And if we can't find ways to heal, face it, we're just going to get one iteration after another. Third, affinity groups. Maybe that's fourth. Embodying messages, nonviolence, training, preparation, and affinity groups. What does that mean? Well, affinity groups are grouplets by small groups. People, everyone's saying, get into pods, find your people. If you're already with them, great. We can't be in actions or build a movement while we're embodying the most destructive US myth, that of individualism. We cannot do it. We burn ourselves out, we burn each other out. So affinity groups, pods, buddies, grouplets, churches, workplaces enable us to reflect together, to become stronger and clearer together, to bridge differences together, to deal with our conditioning, white, male, human supremacy conditioning with one another, and to be an organized part of actions, both taking and giving leadership, and to share in decision-making and sustain ourselves. So trying out scenarios. I'm kind of just moving quickly here. I wanted to, we can talk more about any of these things. I want to end with three. Whenever I lead nonviolence trainings, I start with something called Concentric Circles. It's just a series of social justice speed dating pairs. One sets of questions that you can talk with each other about. Why? Because if we don't have as the very foundation of our movement relationship building, we're sunk. We're able to be divided, and being proximate to each other, cross differences, cross generations, we have so much to learn from one another. So here are 9 questions to take to your pod, to take to your group, to take whatever. 1, whose shoulders are you standing on? 2, what do you draw on to stay grounded and true to your principles? How does that translate into your body? 3, what is your understanding of nonviolence? What does it have to offer? 4, what is your identity and why does it matter to understand that? 5, what fears are you holding in this time? What would help supporting you? Thanks to Claire for that. 6, how to practice calling in rather than calling out. 7, what are your views, experiences, and feelings about the police? 8, what does collaboration, solidarity look like to you? What do you have to offer? What do you have to learn? And 9, what brings you joy and enables you to be celebratory? And I have all kinds of very sophisticated analysis behind each of those questions, which I'll be happy to answer if anyone's interested. I'm probably out of time. I want to just ask you, because we're in the spirit of embodying and not just talking, if you would mimic me in this very tiny exercise from Barbara Deming called The Two Hands of Nonviolence. And so people would just put out your right hand, like, stop. This is the hand that says, no, enough, enough is enough, enough of the lying, enough of the racism, enough of the violence, enough, I won't cooperate with paying taxes, I won't cooperate with going to work, I will, no. And you can throw it in the chat, there's lots of no's, no's, no, 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 because nonviolence is ferocious, right? It is not passive. But the other hand is this. And that's the hand that comes with your heart, your left hand. And that hand says, we are always seeking to perfect our wisdom, to learn from each other, to be open to being wrong, to building something that is truly inclusive, that does not replicate the judgmentalism and division and superiority in all kinds of political ways that actually mimics white supremacy. I'm going to work on being more open. I want to thank you and close with a quotation from Thich Nhat Hanh. All these questions, I have them all to just pop right in the chat for you. And this is just a final quote, because how we express ourselves politically and externally, there's always the internal spiritual piece. And he says this, people who know who Thich Nhat Hanh is, Buddhist person who has stopped eating in the last 2 days. And so I think he will die soon. But he says, many of us worry about the situation of the world. We don't know when the bombs will explode. We feel that we are on the edge of time. As individuals, we feel helpless and despairing. The situation is so dangerous. Injustice is so widespread. The danger is close. In this kind of situation, if we panic, things will only become worse. We need to remain calm to see clearly. Meditation is to be aware and to try and help. Our world is something like a small boat. Compared with the cosmos, our planet is a very small boat. We are about to panic because our situation is no better than the situation of the small boat in the sea. You know that we have more than 50,000 nuclear weapons. Humankind has become a very dangerous species. We need people who can sit still and be able to smile, who can walk peacefully. We need people like that in order to save us. Mahayana Buddhism says that you are that person, that each of you is that person. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Kathy. That is such a brilliant way to keep us grounded and I think inspired to move forward as well. Thank you very much. So we're at that time. It's time for our final speaker. We are very happy and excited to have Bret Edkins with us, political director of Stand Up America and co-founder of Protect the Results, which I'm sure we've all been hearing a lot about recently. Bret is an experienced political operative dedicated to progressive change. He's a graduate of Yale Law School, who previously worked as communications director for Integrity First for America, and as an aide to former National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. So Bret, please take it away.
Hi, well, thanks so much, Nick. I hope you all can hear me now. Thanks for letting me join you. I apologize for being a little bit late. As Nick said, I'm the political director at Stand Up America. My name is Bret Edkins. I'm here to basically provide a quick introduction to Protect the Results, and I would encourage everyone to visit protecttheresults.com to learn a little bit more if I miss anything, and you can fill in some gaps visiting the site. This work really started last year with Stand Up America and Indivisible. And in the past few months, we've built a broad national coalition of over 110 groups that span the ideological spectrum, groups that are concerned about Donald Trump's effort to sow doubt about the election and his continued refusal to say if he'll accept the results. I know that all of you on the call are working really hard to get out the vote and combat Trump's disinformation and ensure that our elections are fair. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing. And that work is really the surest guarantee that on January 20th, 2021, that's the last time any of us will have to think about Donald Trump. And it's also the surest defense that we don't have to worry about the results being protected, that they will be. They'll be self-evident. But the Protect the Results Coalition is preparing to activate, if needed, to ensure a peaceful transition of power. And I want to be clear about one thing. Trump knows he's losing this election. So he wants to pick and choose who can vote, how they can vote, how votes are counted. He hopes that by sowing chaos and doubt and fear, it'll stop us from voting. But I think thanks to all of you, we're going to see record turnout this year. And we're going to ensure that everyone's vote is counted. So just keep that in mind the next time he tweets something utterly absurd. He's scared and he knows he's losing. We're going to work the polls, and we're not going to amplify disinformation, and we're going to help people make a plan to vote as early as possible. We also know that we're not going to get all of the results on election night. It may take days, it may take longer for states to tally everything and certify the results. An unprecedented number of mail-in ballots are being cast this year. Absentee ballots take longer to count because of security measures to verify the accuracy of those ballots. Election officials have a duty to ensure every eligible vote is counted, and officials right now during this pandemic are working with reduced staff. So if we don't have results by midnight or 1 a.m. on election night, that's a sign that our democracy is working. Anyone who says differently is trying to scare you. No one in the media and no one in either party should make a rush to judgment to say who has won the election until all the votes are counted, even if that does take days or weeks. Part of the reason we believe protect the results is needed is that Trump has spent the last 4 years trying to undermine our confidence in elections. In 2016, we remember he repeatedly threatened not to accept the election results unless he won, and he spread baseless claims about voter fraud. We're seeing that again. He's lying about voter fraud now. He's calling the upcoming elections rigged in order to suppress the vote. He's repeatedly said outlandish things about serving beyond his term, warning that people would demand he stay longer. But we're a country of laws. Our elections are sacrosanct. Every president who has lost has stepped down willingly and respected the peaceful transition of power. And frankly, we're bigger than Donald Trump. So if Donald Trump declares victory before all the votes are counted and refuses to concede that if he lost or attempts to undermine the results or the will of the people, we're not going to give him an inch. We plan to mobilize millions of Americans in nonviolent protest around the country to demand that every vote is counted. Protect the Results is a bipartisan coalition. It includes right-leaning groups that believe in the rule of law, unions, environmental groups, racial justice groups, faith-based groups, large grassroots groups. We're engaging with election experts and making sure to coordinate with state and local groups, all of which can host their own Protect the Results events. We're coordinating with a lot of people to discuss messaging and prepare for various scenarios if Trump tries to interfere. And so if you want to help, the best way is to visit protecttheresults.com, where you can pledge to take action. Actually, by tomorrow evening, there will be a map on the site, so you can specifically RSVP to an event near you. And if you don't find an event near you, you can also raise your hand to host an event in your hometown. I'd encourage you to do that if you run a local indivisible chapter or an organization with boots on the ground. And I'd encourage you to collaborate with each other to co-host events, pool your resources. There's already one event in Boston being hosted by Massachusetts Peace Action. Hosts will be provided with a toolkit that explains how to host an event, the nuts and bolts. We're holding trainings, which are being sent out to people who have signed up at protecttheresults.com or have raised their hands to host. If there are multiple hosts in the same place, we're happy to connect people and let them hammer it out. Again, the purpose of this network is to activate protests if Trump triggers a post-election crisis. It's my sincere hope that you all can sign up, plan events, and then on November 4th, the day after the election, I can send you all an email that says, there's no need to protest. Congratulations. But if we need to, we're going to be ready. So thanks so much. Happy to answer any questions if you want.
Brett, you didn't even know it, but that was the perfect segue, because the next section, and thank you so much for the information. The next section is going to be our Q&A. So that's perfect timing. Okay, so the way this is going to work, so time is tough in times of crisis and pandemic. So we're going to do, I think, about 10 minutes of questions, because we're going to have plenty of time during breakout groups afterwards where we can talk more with folks who can talk about their projects. So the way questions are going to work is please put them in the chat. If you can specify who the question is for, that would help a lot. And we will we'll just be taking a couple minutes to kind of filter through them. I already have some queued up, and maybe Cole or Brian, if he's on, could DM me some good ones while I'm reading the ones I already saw. So the first ones are for let's see. Well, let's start off with one for Kathy, because there was kind of an inspiring or informative kind of question that we had first. So Kathy, we had a question that came in. You were talking about, our right hand is saying, stop, this is madness. We can't deal with this anymore. But the left hand is the one that wanted to bring in wisdom. Can you give an example of calling in this moment?
Yeah. In terms of community agreements, whether for a meeting or organization, you can co-create them together. I often offer like 4: share the time, speak from your own experience, both and 2 different things can be true, and calling in instead of calling out. And for me, and they taught us this in Standing Rock, they said, white people, you have a tendency, once you kind of know the way it's supposed to be, to bust people if they're like not following like the politically correct thing. And so we encourage you to interact in a different way. And so calling out is like, Nick, you really kind of didn't pay attention to us, and you could have been a little sharper on the time, and Joseph, you really left out a few things, like that. But all of us do it, and all of us have been in organizations and in meetings where people get called out for being racist, for being sexist, and even those words are calling out words. So what is calling in? Calling in, first of all, is being relational. It's connecting with people around a more inclusive way of looking at things. I really didn't agree with what happened, and we're in this movement together. So how do we move with more appreciation, with more gratitude, with more understanding that perfection is a white supremacist notion in and of itself, if that helps.
Seems very helpful to me. Thank you, Kathy. And I will say from this experience, I did not appreciate being called out. Being called in is way better. All right, so we got another one. This one was duplicated a handful of times. So for the folks who are thinking about Massachusetts voting, a lot of people are asking, how can folks in Mass connect with other states? / should we be trying to, reach out to folks in swing states in this time?
I'm happy to kick it off, and Beth, if you want to cover what I will definitely miss. I think I just want to start by saying that there are, as Beth said, every election is an opportunity that we have to take to build political power here in Massachusetts. So, I know we get the question a lot of what can we be doing in other states, and I want to start by responding that there's a lot of work to do here to reduce political inequality, to build political power, and take down barriers to participation here. So whether that's phone banking, text banking to help educate voters and get out the vote, or helping with election protection, signing up to be a poll monitor, that's real work that has to happen here. Those issues that our election protection program addresses are issues that disproportionately impact communities of color who turn out to vote, whether it's just really long lines or getting turned away improperly. But just to add to that, one way to participate in other states is through social media monitoring for misinformation and disinformation. You get trained, and obviously you can do it from your computer here, but you can work on combating basically online voter suppression anywhere. That said, I of course encourage folks to start with Massachusetts, but I know there's a lot of good work going on with GOTV, letter writing, and a whole lot else, and it all matters.
For sure. Thanks for kicking us off, Christina. So the first is, yes, there's a lot at stake in many other states. What I would recommend that people do is make calls or send texts with a movement organization. Does the organization have a membership base that is mostly people of color, working class, people who are immigrants or more. I remember when I was in my first campaign in 2008, I spent a lot of time at the coordinated campaign office when I was 17. And by the Friday after election day, the campaign office was completely closed. I would encourage people to be involved in movement-based organizations, not just the official candidate campaign, because even though the candidate campaign will be over on election day, those movement organizations will continue. I would recommend checking out organizations like People's Action, Center for Popular Democracy's affiliates, or I think you also can text bank with my national network, State Voices, if anyone is interested. And then the second thing is there's still so much at stake in Massachusetts. The eviction moratorium might end in 11 days. There might be 100,000 families who face homelessness and are also going to lose access to their regular mailbox. And so when you think about how voting is going to work in 2020, when you lose access to your mailbox, you also kind of lose access to what the safest option to vote. So while you're making your calls to other places, really do mobilize your neighbors and your friends to make sure that people are able to stay in their homes and hold on to their political power in a safe way in this election.
Absolutely. Thank you for those answers. And yeah, Beth, I'll plug City Elect Vita Urbana on that. Very, very important campaign. Should definitely take a look on it. So we have one for Bret as well. So when we're thinking about protecting parts of the election, are there organized bipartisan actions or groups that are trying to do this thing, or is it mostly left-right split?
So at least in Protect the Results, we have groups across the spectrum. Republicans for the Rule of Law is part of the coalition. Stand Up Republic is part of the coalition. And our work is all focused on in-person mobilizations after the election. There are a lot of nonpartisan or bipartisan groups working to do election protection work before the election or on election day. I think Christina has talked about that, and Common Cause is obviously a perfect example of that kind of work.
Perfect, thanks. We have one specifically for Christina here. So, so this one says, okay, here in Bristol County, it's been a little dicey. There's a lot of visible Trump support, plus Sheriff Hodgson. Undoubtedly, this person is saying, will block voting by prisoners. We and other counties and municipalities could really use some guidance and resources. Anyone who's been at recent confrontational protests with hundreds of Trumpers in the area understands that we're not all set en masse. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, a good response isn't to just agree. Bristol County is one of the counties where we have had a really hard time getting access to eligible voters who are incarcerated there, which, by the way, it's both people who are incarcerated on misdemeanor convictions, but it's also people who are held, and overwhelmingly, it's folks who are held pre-trial. So they're disenfranchised without having been convicted of any crime. Bristol is one of the ones that we've been working on. I'm not particularly optimistic because of Sheriff Hodgson's kind of general politics, and we're also keeping an eye on different counties that, well, I think that's the one where there are some concerns about additional law enforcement at polling places, which is a whole separate issue in and of itself. The short answer is that because the way, at least as I understand it, Massachusetts law is written and the burden on voting is on individual incarcerated citizens, there's not a whole lot we can do to force Sheriff Hodgson to do anything, because his bottom line can be, as it has been for sheriffs in Massachusetts in past years and in states across the map, that, well, if anyone who's incarcerated really wants to vote, they can figure it out and it will work. That's why it's so important that we pass legislation next session that shifts the burden onto sheriffs and creates some system that actually assures ballot access for those folks who maintain the right to vote. But I'd agree, yeah, I mean, Massachusetts is not all, it's certainly not a sure thing. Or I think sometimes people think about Massachusetts as like the model democracy, and it isn't. We don't even have same-day registration here. So there is, again, I think I'm taking this as an opportunity to plug that there's really a lot to do here in our home state.
Yeah, one very small thing that I'd add to Christina's remarks is that the sheriffs and the district attorneys are both up for election at the county level in 2022. If we want to make sure that a large number of people of color and working class people living in over-policed neighborhoods have a say in how law enforcement and public safety works in their neighborhoods, including in Bristol County, we need to make sure that people get out to vote in 2020 so that we can continue to mobilize and organize people around these really important issues in 2022. And there are amazing community organizations that have been fighting this fight like 365 days a year, including the Coalition for Social Justice in Bristol County and Fall River and New Bedford, including Families for Justice's Healing and Mass Bail Fund. So those are some organizations. Again, it's not about the campaigns, it's kind of about the campaigns, but it really is about building the organizing infrastructure that's going to make sure that people have a say in their lives.
I also wanted to just this question about Massachusetts, because it's been my impression too, like, you know, do we really have to worry about Massachusetts in terms of the voting question? But I have been hearing more and more also the issue of the suburbs in Massachusetts and the presence of alt-right, back the blue rallies. And so I think it's really important to think about creative responses for people in those suburbs, not necessarily to go and confront. I mean, that's one choice, but really to have presences about what kind of vision for our communities we want to put out and to actually take them on. And similarly, we have really developed, and there are a number of people who are on this video and others have been working with a whole new framework around peacekeeping and marshaling for our gatherings that have to do with the presence of the alt-right and new ways of trying to kind of keep ourselves some distancing between us and the alt-right folks who are coming, all of whom, of course, are not wearing masks. And so it presents a thing. But, you know, one of the things is that they come and they take your photograph, and then they find out who you are, and then they put it on social media, and people's lives are being destroyed. And so one of our tiny little tips around logistics is for people doing marshalling or peacekeeping with masks is also to actually make it more difficult to determine who you are. So we have to tell our friends who we are anyway, which is a good reminder since some of us can't remember people's names. But really, it's like there's some new strategies here about how to embody something nonviolent, beautiful, connecting, and also be sensitive to these new situations.
If I could just do one more thing in terms of Massachusetts and the rest of the country. If it proves necessary to call out demonstrations on the other side of the election, even if we generally get the vote that we want here in Massachusetts, taking to the streets here in Massachusetts will be important as part of national solidarity. And I want to encourage people to think in terms of forming affinity groups in advance and getting the training in advance so people are ready if and when a call is made. One other thought, I put it in the chat, but just to put it out here, in one other form of direct action on the other side may be the need to call for a general strike. The idea of withdrawing support and in that way exercising people's power, not necessarily in the streets, but even from our homes. So just something to be thinking about.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all very much for the answers. I think at this point, great. Well, yeah, I really hope everyone else's breakout went as well as the one that I was in did. So we'll just kind of wrap up the night. That was all we had. I once again want to thank all of our speakers so much for sharing their wisdom with us. So thank you to Joseph, to Christina, to Beth, Kathy, and Brett. I had to redo the order in my head because it's in a different order that I wrote down. Yeah, thank you, like sincerely, really thank you all so much. I think, you know, we kind of opened and went through an arc during this talk where we started out in kind of a feeling of gravity and you know, pretty heavy seriousness. But I think from the comments that I heard, I at least felt so empowered and like I should really just go out and say, hey, we're just here to do this. Let's all act together and move forward on this. And that it doesn't have to be as scary as we kind of think it is a lot of times. So thank you for the kind words. And I'll once again shout out our sponsoring organizations. We, of course, Mass Peace Action. Thank you so much for organizing this. We also had 350 Mass, Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security, Mass Alliance of HUD Tenants, I would say that wrong, and Progressive Mass. If you all want to keep up with stuff, I think we're going to send a follow-up email after this with the video and some interesting links. Someone just entered the Zoom. That's the wrong time to come in. We're going to send an email with some interesting links after this and maybe some stuff that the folks said. Yes, and if you want to kind of keep in the loop of these events, go to masspeaceaction.org and subscribe to our e-alerts or other things to check out when stuff's coming next. Okay, thank you all so much and have a great night.